Measuring development. Looking at development can give a fuller picture. Measurements of growth or unemployment are used to work out the standard of living in a country, but often those figures don't tell us the full story. A better way to look at a country's standard of living is to measure its economic development. Measuring the economic development of a country means trying to work out the level of social and human welfare, sometimes called the quality of life. To measure development, economists need more indicators than just economic growth, inflation and unemployment rates to be able to get a fuller picture of the quality of life in a country. This is especially important when comparing the economies of two very different countries. For example, a rich, economically developed country such as the UK and a poor, less economically developed country such as Nigeria. The Human Index considers a broader range of indicators. The Human Index, otherwise known as HDI, was developed by the United Nations to measure and rank countries' level of social and economic development. The HDI includes social indicators to give a fuller picture of the quality of life in a country. The HDI combines indicators in three equally weighted sections: health, as measured by life expectancy; education, as measured by average and expected years in school; standards of living, as measured by real GNI per capita, using the principle of purchasing power parity. These figures are used because they are fairly standard around the world and relatively easy to collect. HDI is used in different ways. The HDI can be used to measure changes in development levels over time in a country. It's also used in a slightly different way when you consider it can be used to compare the levels of development between countries. Also, countries are either ranked in order, with country number 1 being the highest and most developed, or the HDI is given as an index with a range between 1 and 0. Above 0.8 would indicate a high level of human development. Between 0.8 and 0.5 suggests a medium level of human development. Between below 0.5, beg your pardon, shows a low level of human development. In the UK, in 2013, the UK's HDI was 14th in the world and its index was 0.892. So we were ranked 14th, far from number 1, which I think was Norway. The HDI has its critics though. First, we can talk about a long life expectancy is not the same as high quality of life. Someone with a long life expectancy might have to work long hours in unpleasant conditions, or they might not have much freedom. 2, measuring the average number of years people spend in school doesn't mean the quality of teaching or how well people learn what they're taught. Using GNPI per capita figures can lead to inaccurate comparisons. For example, GNI per capita doesn't include the hidden economy, and this tends to make up a larger proportion of the economy in less developed countries. Finally, the HDI figure also doesn't measure the extent of inequality in a country. A country with a satisfactory HDI rank may have a few very wealthy people and a large number of very poor people. There are other ways to measure development. First, one way of measuring development is using the percentage of the adult male labour working in agriculture. Agricultural work is very hard and workers are often paid very little. The economic output from agriculture is generally quite low too. As countries become more developed, they tend to use more machinery for farming and employ fewer workers. As a result, countries with a higher percentage of the population working in agriculture generally have low levels of economic development. Second, another measure of development is the number of mobile phones per thousand of the population. Mobile phones improve communication and trading, which can lead to greater economic development. A larger number of mobile phones indicates that wages are high enough for people to afford to buy them. Third, some other indicators to measure a country's development include level of disease, level of malnutrition, newspapers bought per thousand of the population, energy consumption of that is electricity and gas per head, levels of political and social freedom, levels of environmental impact and sustainability, access to clean water. The Genuine Progress Indicator, GPI, attempts to improve on GDP as an economic indicator by including measures of the impact of economic growth on the environment, as well as other social factors. GPI takes GDP into account, but also measures the negative effects of growth. For example, resource depletion and degradation. The negatives of growth are subtracted from the positives. The Genuine Progress Indicator, GPI, also tries to get a fuller picture of people's quality of life by measuring, for example, the costs of crime and the value of volunteer work, housework and parenting. Happiness can be linked to economic growth. Happiness economics tries to measure any factor that is associated with increased or even decreased levels of subjective well-being. For example, how satisfied people say they feel with their lives. This might include things like political freedom or family relationships. Happiness is tricky to measure, but many economists claim that psychological surveys can give a reliable measure of how happy and satisfied people are with their lives. The UK's Office for National Statistics, the ONS, now runs a Measuring National Wellbeing programme. It records statistics concerning, for example, people's health, relationships, education and finances, along with those people's own assessments of their personal well-being. The aim is to help the government devise policies that achieve better outcomes in those areas that are particularly important to people. This leads us to one final consideration, the Easterlin paradox. The Easterlin paradox, named after the economist Richard Easterlin, describes how increases in GDP are not always associated with increases in people's happiness levels. Easterlin found that when incomes are not sufficient to meet basic needs, increasing GDP does not lead to greater happiness. But people in rich countries tend not to be much happier than those in poor countries. And as people get richer, the happiness levels generally don't increase along with their income. In these richer countries, it seems that a person's absolute income isn't as important as their relative income. Being rich doesn't make someone happy if someone else around them is equally rich, but being richer than people around them does.